You may know them for their wood glues, but did you know Titebond also has a complete selection of construction adhesives? Designed for a variety of applications, Titebond's adhesives make any building or home improvement project a breeze with their high-performing and durable formulas. These adhesives are trusted by the professional, providing squeak-free subfloor installations, long-lasting retaining walls, and even fastener-free feature walls. Check out Titebond's construction adhesives at titebond.com, including their newest award-winning adhesive, Tight Grab Plus.
What he described is how I avoided having to hire an engineer for my house. I used the lumberyard's ability to produce the engineering documents for those beams and for my floor system. There's just a lot of things like that that you can do to speed up that process and make it easier.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey everyone.
Fine Homebuilding Contributing Editor and Production Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Howdy.
And our amazing producer, Andres Samaniego.
Hello.
Please email your questions to FHBpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Guys, thanks very much for being here. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
See you.
Ian, you sent me some photos this morning of Sarah's seed starting space in the house. Do you want to describe that, please?
Yeah, so we carved a little room out of the back of our garage, both driving small vehicles. She gets the half behind her car, and I get the half behind my truck for a shop space where I can roll my tools out. But we walled her spot off, and she's got her grow room set up in there with a whole bunch of grow lights and seed starting equipment and little heating pads and all kinds of different stuff for getting the garden going this year.
We were talking ahead of the show. I'm familiar with some of the gear you're talking about because Carol does the same thing in our basement. And does she enjoy this, or is this just a matter of getting good food, or is it more than that as part of recreation or a hobby?
She gives the impression that she enjoys it, so I hope that that's true. It's a cool hobby. It's something that she was doing on a much smaller scale when we lived in New York, and now that we're on a larger farm property, and I think our garden is close to 3/4 of an acre, so it's a pretty good size piece. And then she has her plastic janky greenhouse that I put together that Patrick tried to warn me was going to be so much work, and he was correct. But at some point, all of the seeds that she started will move out into the greenhouse, and it's this process of staging things before we probably on Memorial Day weekend put it all in the ground.
You mentioned shopping at the Habitat Restore locally for some building materials for this space. Do you do that often? What'd you buy? What have you gotten there?
This was the first time I bought anything for myself. We did a small kitchen remodel for my parents, and we took all of the old appliances over there. And I went to a couple of them trying to find the right door because she wanted a full glass door, but preferably an exterior door so it had some insulating value because she is heating the space to a higher temperature than we're heating our garage to. So I had to go to a couple of them, but eventually found that one. And I don't know what barn that thing was sitting in, but it was like covered in grease and like all this other kind of weird material. So we had to clean it up, but I think that played into the $40 price tag.
Do you think it had ever been installed? Was it in a building at one point, or just?
I think it was in a building. I think it was in a building and somebody saved it, but I don't know what was going on above it. It seemed like it was covered in maple syrup. Just that was kind of the look of it. But we stripped it back down, and it seems to be working good.
$40, holy cow! You can't beat that.
And it came with a doorknob.
Brian, I'm going to get to you and ask you about the Builders Show in a little bit here, but I want to talk to Andres about his amazing garage shop. This seems to have gone from 0 to 100 in a week or two. What's going on there?
Seems
Yeah,
painfully well organized.
Yeah.
yeah, that was my main issue there. It was used mostly as a storage, so I was not able to find my tools. Everything was in the Milwaukee bags, or those carry-ons, and I was not able to find anything. So finally decided to organize everything. So now all the tools are on the wall, so I'm able to see where everything is. Not only that, but I built two benches, so I'm in the middle of finishing up the second bench for more woodworking storage.
It looks like there's like some kind of soffit framed in your photo. What is that?
Yeah, so I don't have any soffits in my garage, so that was my main concern about insulating. And that was the talk before we had a conversation with Mike Gurdon. He recommended to just insulate, inside and do a vent, like a soffit vent or something, some type of vent, just to get the heat and the moisture out.
It looks great.
Thanks.
Brian, you were in Las Vegas recently, and of course, folks who were listening to the show, that was weeks ago. But briefly, do you want to talk about the state of the building industry?
Well, from the appearances of Design and Construction Week, which is what is now this combination. I mean, it's been for many years now, but it hasn't always been like this, which is a combination of the Builder Show put on by the National Association of Home Builders and the Kitchen and Bath Industry Show put on by National Kitchen and Bath Designer Association, I think is what they're called. It's this event that takes up the convention center in Las Vegas, and I think interestingly, these shows combined at a time when they were both really kind of hurting. When attendance, after the market crash in 2008, when attendance at these shows was really at a low point, because before that they were separate shows, and so they came together at that point, I think, to be more efficient, and these shows have kind of had this slow recovery to the point I haven't been now in about maybe 5 or 6 years, to the point where now it's really a booming event. If this show is any indication of how the building industry is doing, it is alive and well. Many manufacturers are there, big and small, big booths, great demonstrations. Lots of innovation. I just feel like at so many of the booths I saw either innovation, like really kind of big innovations, or just kind of manufacturers that are continuing to like just subtly tweak their products. So for example, I was at the Panasonic booth and looking at their ventilation systems, and it just seemed like in nearly every system they had updated their products. So the Whisper Comfort ERV that I actually have in my house used to be an ERV that could push up to 40 CFMs, and they realized that was, they were losing a lot of people because it was just not quite big enough. So they upped the flow rate to a max potential of 60 CFMs. They brought the controls. You used to kind of had to pick your flow rate before you installed the machine, because you had to actually switch a plug to change the flow rate. They brought these controls that they have on all their other ERVs right out front underneath the cover, which it seems like a no-brainer, but I'm glad they did it. They've new motion sensor and humidistat in some of their bath fans that's really elegant and easy to control and dial in. They have a new exhaust boost for dryers that is just a sort of nice, smart in-wall solution. So they were just these sort of, at Panasonic's booth, it was just sort of these product updates. At other places, it was more like bigger launches. And one of the ones that fascinated me the most, and maybe people have seen this now, but the new installation system for Pella windows. Have you all seen this?
No.
What I think is a really fascinating innovation that we saw at the show is this new installation system for Pella windows, and they seem to have taken some cues from the European flangeless window installation process, where you can install the windows from inside the building. And they've come up with a way that you can do this with what is still a more typical flanged domestic window. And the way this works is that the windows come with these rubber flanges on them. So one piece, or at least seamless rubber flange that wraps around the window. But the flanges come flapped down on top of the, folded in towards the window on all sides, almost how you would, they would come on a window, on some windows where you have to kind of pop them up before you install the window from the outside, except that these are meant to kind of spring into position as you push the window through the opening from the inside.
Like a toggle bolt?
Well, they're just flexible. Uh-huh. So as you push the window through the opening, they can kind of be pushed back, and then as you push it out, as that flange pops past the rough opening, it's going to flop open. And then the window has these two clips that come attached to the window jamb, and they come turned in, but so you just kind of slide them out and you turn them around, and they're just an L-shaped clip, and they catch your framing. As you're pushing the window into the opening, they catch the framing from the inside, and those clips are where you fasten the window. So in other words, you don't fasten anything through this flange, so you don't penetrate the flange. It's simply for, you don't fasten anything through it. It's simply for flashing. So all that you do is tape that flange to the window as you would tape any other window flange, but you don't penetrate through it. You fasten the window with these clips. And even more, it comes with spacers on the bottom of the window so that if you have a level sill, you don't have to, pry the window up and space it so that you can air seal below the window. It's already spaced, and it comes with and this is the one thing that I'm sort of curious how well this works, but it also comes with this sort of one-way grip at the top of the window that prevents the window from falling into the opening until it's fastened, because the clips are going to keep it from falling out of the opening, but this will prevent it from falling into the opening. So really, well, one builder said to me after actually having had a chance to practice and try out the system, he said, I can have my least skilled carpenter place these windows in the openings, feel really comfortable that they're safe, and then have my more skilled carpenters come around, check the windows for square level plumb and fasten them off. So he felt like this is, that there's a lot of benefit to this. And I was fascinated by it. I kept asking people what they thought of it. And really very few people came, not having, actually used it on real job sites yet, but very few of the builders that I was asking about it were not kind of impressed with it. And all seemed to feel like Pella had come up with something good there.
I'm speechless because this stuff doesn't change. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but think about the idea of being, Josh Salinger, who installs lots of European windows, was, his response was kind of like, duh. But the idea of being able to install windows from inside the house, standing on the floor, is awesome, right? Not working on ladders or scaffolding, carrying them up your stairs, not trudging them up ladders. All of that just seems so smart to me. So to solve for that without completely reinventing, how people imagine windows being installed, because I think that's, they kind of look like any other flanged window. So, no one's going to be really confused by this system. I think it's pretty easy to wrap your head around how this works.
You made mention in a recent staff meeting, Brian, that we're hoping to get one of these and try it out. And I think it's totally worth doing because, oftentimes things are revealed that you can't see from a trade show booth, but it seems very promising, I got to say. Yeah,
I just would love to talk to a builder who, an unbiased builder who's, done a house or two with these windows and really get that, that kind of feedback after, not just kind of taking a look at the system and thinking, oh, it's a good idea, but, really working with it.
Well, Pella, not a sponsor.
Yeah, I just, for some reason, this was fascinating to me. There were so many other things. I mentioned Panasonic. I got to see Benjamin Obdike's vapor open roofing underlayment, and talk to them more about that and its uses. Just sort of like lots of in the new products area, there's all these like innovative things that you're just kind of like, there's not much information in the new products area. They just kind of have the product in this little kind of paragraph about it. So you have to kind of, judge for yourself whether you think it's actually a good idea. But we saw, some paintbrushes that, with that you send the paint to the brush with a hose. So you have this constant flow of paint into your paintbrush.
That doesn't sound messy at all.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you think, can this really work? Like, what about painting overhead with this thing? You get to kind of see it all there. There were InsoFast panels that are now made for exterior continuous insulation, which seemed kind of smart. Again, I'd love to hear from a builder who's worked with them.
So briefly, those are polystyrene with like some kind of nailers embedded in them. Is that right?
Yeah, they've been around a long time for interior use, mostly in basement applications. If you think of an ICF, right, that has it's EPS and it has embedded fastening for drywall or for cladding. It's the same thing, except it's just a panel, so that you can do inside of a basement or a stick framed house, using them as exterior insulation, and you can fasten your furring strips or whatever you're fastening to the right to it on the exterior to these to these fastening strips. So that was interesting that they moved into that continuous insulation space with a thicker panel that has enough R value to be effective outside. So just lots and lots of stuff like that at the show. It was great to be there. Plus, getting to see our network of people and is just wonderful, because we often don't see these people in person. So.
Well, it delights me to hear about cool stuff that's happening, because I would say for a few years the industry was in a kind of tenuous spot, and that's one of the first things that goes is you can't do R&D, you can't bring out new products, you're just trying to keep going.
Yeah,
good deal.
One of the things we've talked a lot about in recent episodes of the show, we've talked a lot about rot resistant woods, a lot of thermally modified wood products. Bunch of brands that I hadn't heard of before, and really nice looking stuff. So I feel like that product category is coming to life.
I'm glad you bring that up, because it's a chance to remind folks how important the podcast is to generating fine home building content ideas. And Doug Horgan heard our show and discussion about PT ain't what it used to be, and this is something he's observed in his work in the Washington D.C. area of decks, and sometimes important structural elements are compromised by rot. And this was not something we would have expected with CCA, but the new preservatives are not as robust, and so we're going to develop a fine home building feature on that subject, strategies for preventing decay. What has actually happened in these situations and how they resolve. So I'm really psyched about that, and I thank you all who write into the email box very much, because of your input and questions. The show is really much better than it would be.
Yeah, and Patrick, I think maybe even worth noting that we get so many good questions for the podcast that we've been talking about using some of them in the magazine in our Ask the Experts column, so that we can really get to some more. Like we have sometimes we do a good job answering these questions, and sometimes we don't.
Sometimes.
The ones that we really feel like a lot of our audience could benefit from. We feel like it's a good opportunity to get to have an expert on the topic really dial in and answer. So by sending us email to the podcast, you might also get a real expert answer in the magazine.
Don't put the bar too high, Brian. Well, in the continuing conversation on EVs, this comes from John. Patrick, you mentioned the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid costs $51K. Look at the price of the Ford E-Transit. This thing's a beast for the same price. I think it's the same frame as the half-ton truck. Probably same towing capacity too. On another note, in Ireland, I didn't see a single pickup for the first week in County Cork. They do use transit vans, though. Ian, you've been to Ireland. Did you see pickup trucks, or do they have something against pickup trucks? What's that about?
Been to Wales. Closed, but no pickup trucks there either.
Why?
Lots of little vans, lots of little Volkswagen vans and little Ford vans, no trucks. That is a uniquely American, North and South American thing, I believe.
Brian, there was someone who wrote into last week's show. You were away. They pointed out that their work truck had beat you in terms of years on the road. They had, I think it was a 70s era step van, what looked like a former bread truck. Yeah. Super sweet.
Did we put that? Did we put a photo of that on the website? Because it was such a cool looking truck.
It was. Yeah, we did. And the organization, I think you'd agree, was amazing, right?
Yeah. Someone else wrote in. I don't know if you read this one, but someone else wrote in about had done the calculations on keeping my old gas guzzling truck versus going to did you read that on the show?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was glad. I mean, I love it when someone does the math because
you don't want to.
I'm not likely to do math, so I really appreciated that letter. And if that math is in that account, carbon accounting is accurate, then it points me in a different direction.
I love that our listeners do math for us. That is fantastic. Anytime, y'all. This comes from John. I too have been curious about sources of CO in an all-electric house. I converted my old house to all-electric specifically because I didn't want to have to deal with CO or explosions, and I don't have an attached garage. Thanks for discussing it. Would a possible source be a house fire smoldering in the attic or wall? And would a standard smoke detector sound the alarm before CO levels were elevated? I have no idea. Maybe a dumb question. Where would CO come from in a all-electric house is a question I have. And the only thing I could think of was if you had pollution from outside, but I can't imagine it getting high enough that it would be a risk. But maybe I'm wrong about that, especially in a super tight house. Thoughts, guys? Ian, Brian?
I don't know that there's anywhere for it to come from in an all-electric house without an attached garage or with a attached garage that actually does a good job of separating, not letting that outdoor air in. But I'm just going to, refer back to what both you, Patrick, and Ian said last time we had this discussion, which is that, it might come from future homeowners. And so we don't know how people are going to live in the house down the road. And as soon as they put in an unvented propane heater in a room that isn't comfortable, or a gas stove, that's good reason to consider the possibility of it at any point, because it's a killer.
John also writes, the Moen flow is really interesting. I see a lot of posts on various forums as well as local news stories where a water customer suddenly billed a huge amount for water. The water companies generally say, after investigating their own meters, that the meter is okay and they should check their toilets. That's hilarious. Sometimes, rarely, it is a bad meter, and sometimes when the meter is in a box outside the house, it's a leak between the meter and the house. And sometimes there's no clear cause. The Moen flow could help in these situations, either by keeping the water company honest or detecting a leak outside the house. It's like an energy monitor, but for water. The data would be interesting. Thanks for another great podcast. You're working on this subject, right, Brian?
I kind of am. I have. I wrote a while ago for Green Building Advisor. I wrote an article on water leak detectors, and we always thought that it was something that we should share with the Fine Homebuilding audience, because it's a really interesting product category. The Moen Flow is the one that gets a lot of attention, and it's a really nice product. But there's lots of other options for water leak detectors, and so I think what we want to do for Fine Homebuilding is to update that product piece, because now it's it could be out of date because these products change so quickly. And also we're gonna work with a plumber and add a little how-to section so that we can show people how to install one of these products in their either PEX or copper plumbing in their house, because I think it's something that our audience, plumber or not plumber, could probably tackle with a little bit of guidance. So I think we're going to weave in a how-to component to it and publish it in the magazine. Yeah.
What, you laughing, Ian? You're not ready for this? You're going to leave that to a plumber? What?
No, I was laughing at the face you made when Brian referred to it as a DIY ready install.
Well, I didn't say DIY ready because I wouldn't do it. I'm not a plumber, but I know
DIY
that I know
optional.
that a lot of fine home building, audience do tackle projects like this and do have the gumption to tackle projects like this. So
I'm scared to change the water filter on the sediment trap there. This comes from Jerry. Hey, y'all. I have thoughts on the engineering and inspection discussion from the February 16th, number 619 podcast. I'm a project manager for our largest remodeling company. I just checked my calendar over the past 12 months, and I've been to something like 120 inspections from foundation, trades, drywall, and building inspections. Generally speaking, those interactions go smoothly, and the inspectors are helpful and fun to talk to. I will go on record saying that I like them. Good builders and tradespeople really don't have much to worry about, but I can understand situations where existing conditions or odd designs can force a project into the realm of the unknown, where the inspector who has to stamp and verify building safety does not want to put their name on the line without some kind of engineering for a sign-off. These days, engineering doesn't have to be difficult. For instance, there are lots of products that come pre-engineered as long as used per the manufacturer's instructions. Great examples include the many screws offered by Fasten Master, which include headlock, timberlock, etc. Additionally, most lumber yards who sell products by companies like Boise Cascade have access to their engineering software that will kick out an engineering report, maybe not a stamp, but enough to confirm that a beam or header will carry the load it's designed for. The lumber yard wants to sell the beam, and so you get the engineering baked in or kiln dried into the cost of the material. Plan reviewers during the permitting process are usually the first encounter with the building department asking for engineering, and sometimes they just want a simple note stating that the installed beam will come with engineering on site. Often this is what truss roofs get. The company that designs and builds the trusses tags each one, and the tag and documentation they ship with the lumber is all that is needed for the inspector. The permit application and drawings usually just say to reference the truss manufacturer's documentation on site. Okay, so I've said nice things about inspectors. Can I please have my permit now? In all seriousness, I'd love to hear more about others' experience here. Thanks for all you do. Love the podcast. Well, I appreciate your answering the call, Jerry, for experience with inspectors. I hope other listeners will write in. What do you think, Ian? Are folks generally easy to get along with on the inspection side?
Yeah, most of the time they are. The points that Jerry made in that email, I think, are just spot on and should be something that everybody's thinking of when they go to some of these engineered solutions. What he described is how I avoided having to hire an engineer for my house. I used the lumberyard's ability to produce the engineering documents for those beams and for my floor system. I used them to help me with the walls to make sure that my tall walls were going to work to code. We ended up using LSLs for everything. They did the roof. They did so much legwork that I didn't have to pay for. One thing I would add, I was really concerned about my deck railing and whether or not the glass deck rail that I bought from a big box store was going to work. And when I talked to the inspector about it during my framing inspection, I pulled up the sheet, the spec sheet, and he looked at it and said, yeah, this is fine. You just have to install it exactly as it says on here. You've already got the framing done to what they told you to do for prep work, so you're fine. That's all I have to see. There's just a lot of things like that you can do to speed up that process and make it easier.
Boy, I can't think that modern houses would get built otherwise, right?
Yeah.
The complexity and the varied materials that are in a modern house, someone's got to be figuring out how to put them in, right?
Yeah, and his comment about, they want to sell the beam and the company that made the beam wants to sell it, so it's in their best interest to give you all that help. You might as well take it.
What were you going to say, Brian?
Well, one of the things that the code books often do is they use the word approved. So they'll give a prescriptive way to do something, but then they'll say, or using an approved product or approved method. And that approved is Glenn Mathewson described it to me as like really, I think it was Glenn, as really like ultimately it means what your local building official is going to approve. But the International Code Council also has their approval services arm, right? The
ICCES.
What is it? ICCES, yes. And so most manufacturers of good products have an approval report listed with with that service, and you can go to the website and you can download those reports. So if there's anything that your building official is not familiar with, and one of those reports is available, that is likely going to be all the documentation that they need to say, okay, like a railing, like in Ian's case, if Ian could have, if that was a product that had an ICCES evaluation report, he could have printed that, brought it to the meeting with his building official. And my guess is that if you have that official documentation, they're going to be happy that they can slide that into your file and let you go with it.
That may have even been what I downloaded from the manufacturer's website. I'm not sure, but that sounds like what it was.
We should mention that there are other companies that do this kind of approval work. The ICCES evaluation service is only one of them. I think there are other companies. But the thing is, in any case, it's still up to the local inspector whether they want to go along or not.
Yeah, and they may, sometimes they may have issues with certain things, but a lot of times I think it's about documentation. Yeah. Right? Like, I know I've talked to a lot of builders who say that the inspectors never look at their trusses. They just want the documentation. They just want the plan from, the engineering report from the truss manufacturing company, but they don't climb a ladder and look at the truss installation.
Boy, that's a topic for another day, but I got thoughts on that. Our first question comes from Ben. Gents, appreciate the show, especially both the humor and the honesty that accompanies it. As I've heard in many other questions and comments from your listeners, I too had a difficult time finding a builder in my area, rural southeast North Carolina, that understood my vision for a super insulated airtight house. But you need the house to breathe, and that seems excessive, were typical responses. So I decided to strike out on my own and cobble together my own high-performance home. But it's issues like the one below that keep me up at night and delay movement on the build. I posted this question to the FHB forum, but would appreciate your input as well if you're able. Here's a description of the build. I'm looking for some input on insulating the roof deck. It's in climate zone 3A, which is hot and humid. I have a sealed/conditioned attic. I'm planning to build a roof assembly like this from the outside in. Metal shingle roof, zip sheathing, 2-inch XPS foam, zip sheathing on the roof rafters, 2 to 3 inches of closed cell spray foam on the inside, and with mineral wool or fiberglass bats underneath that. Questions. Does this assembly make sense? I've seen a lot of roof retails here, Building Science Corp. And elsewhere, but none directly address the combination of closed cell foam and exterior insulation. Number 2, code calls for R36 bat insulation or R30 if using continuous insulation. The spray foam installers with whom I've spoken all have quoted only doing 2.5 inches of closed cell foam, which is at most R18. When I've asked about how they meet code, they just shrug. Is adding bat insulation the best way to beef up the R value? I think these are pretty quick answers, which is kind of a deviation from the norm here. But do you want to take a stab, Ian, first?
No, if they're so quick, you knock them out, Patrick.
I don't think closed cell
Slow
foam on
it
the
down
other
with
side
my
makes sense if you're
long-winded.
going to put exterior foam on the outside of the sheathing. Am I right? I think that's why you don't see this assembly drawn at Building Science Corporation or any of the other usual suspects. What are you going to say, Brian?
I'm going to say let's rethink this. Let's rethink this assembly because for 2 reasons. In my from what I know, from what I understand about these assemblies, 2 reasons are: one, you've used products on the inside and outside that limit drying. So you've used closed cell foam on the inside, which severely limits inward drying, and you've used XPS on the outside, which will allow some but not much drying to the exterior. So therefore, I think that those product choices are for that reason are not good product choices. Secondly, I think putting all the 3 insulation, he's picked like the 3 highest embodied carbon insulations that he could possibly use on the roof, and I think we could do something to minimize that. So first to Patrick's, I think Patrick was alluding to, like, you don't need both these foams. You don't need rigid foam on the exterior and then closed cell foam on the interior. If you have, in that climate zone, I think you just need about R5 of exterior insulation to keep the sheathing warm, as long as you don't go above about R33 of insulation on the interior. So he could simply do R5 exterior. If he wants to use XPS, use XPS, and then he could do the inside with any type of fluffy insulation. I'd recommend something blown in closed cell, or now wood fiber is available. Maybe. Or
You said blown in closed cell. You mean cellulose?
I'm sorry, cellulose. Yep, I misspoke. Cellulose or wood fiber on the interior. Now you've got inward drying, possibility of inward drying, and so no interior, at least not a class 1 vapor retarder. You want something that air seals the interior, but you don't want poly on that roof. And I don't think he would in his climate zone, but just worth mentioning that it could be that simple, right? R5 on the exterior, any fibrous material on the interior to get him to about R33. And I think that's not only a safer roof, but also, again, less embodied carbon. Take that a step further, maybe using mineral wool on the exterior. Now you could build a roof that could dry in both directions. You could use mineral wool on the exterior, the comfort board maybe. Again, just get to R5 or a little bit above would be great. Do the inside with something fibrous. Do maybe a responsive interior vapor retarder mostly for air sealing on the inside, and then I think that's a better roof too.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Ian, you concur?
Yeah, and if you're dreaming up assemblies that Stebrick has not come up with for your area, just put the pen down. Put down.
I got a simple answer why the spray foamers shrug is because they know if they tell you what it's going to cost to put the code required R value in there, they're going to be hiking down the road pretty quickly. So, yeah, that's my guess why they're shrugging.
They're shrugging because they don't understand why you would do this assembly either.
So
and air seal on the inside. I mean, that's really so important.
I think this question really highlights the challenge that people outside the industry have when they try and tackle designing their own high performance home. There's just so much information out there that is, location specific. What he's talking about for a roof assembly is something closer to what you would build in Wisconsin or Minnesota, with that much insulation packed into it and complexity, and just seems wholly unnecessary in Southeast North Carolina.
Oh gosh, yeah, put the money somewhere else, right? Yeah. This comes from James in Denver. Dear FHB podcast, the most often discussed solutions for insulating a rim joint seem tedious and time consuming. I don't want the expense and environmental impact of spray foam, and cut and cobble is a nightmare. Would you kindly weigh in on this alternate idea? Could I line the inside of a rim joist with 1 or 2 inches of polyiso and shoot nails through the rim, through the polyiso into the floor joist ends? The sill plate and top plate would have to be wider, maybe 2x8, so that the joist still had enough bearing. This solution could be followed up with an easy layer of rock wool in between the joists. Is this crazy? Is it against code? Please advise. Thanks for all the great information. James from Denver.
This is an easy one to answer. Yes and yes.
Do you like this idea?
Flip it, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
He's got it backwards. Put the foam on the outside and do exactly what he talked about, but flip the rim joist.
I think we all agree. This was your suggestion too, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have I'm looking at a drawing. Well, give me a second and I'll be looking at it. Now I'm looking at a drawing from a TDS house that does exactly this. And I know Mike talks about this, and Ian, maybe you know for sure, but I think that often you don't even need a bigger plate, right? I think there's usually plenty of bearing on a 2x6 plate to land your rim joists, your joists, and have this little bit of rigid foam.
Correct, yeah. It depends on how thick you want to go with the rigid foam. I think you can easily do like 1.5 inches, but if you start to go bigger than that, you might need a larger plate. or in the case of the house you're referring to, I think we had to consider it with the 2x framing of the basement wall where some of those joists were going to sit on. I believe that had to be a 2x6 wall because of that.
I think I've seen a similar detail used with I-joists too. I think there are manufacturer details for insetting the rim joist. You're nodding, Ian. Have you guys seen it?
Yeah, that's what we used.
Yeah.
That's what Brian's talking about that he's seen on our house design.
It delights me when we have a simple answer, right? This comes from our friend Dack. I was waiting till you were on the show, Ian, with your Midwestern sensibilities to have...
My buddy Dack.
Yeah, have a discussion about Dack's observation here. Dack sent us a New York Times article that describes the Great Compression, which I found to be an interesting head. In the magazine biz, for those of you who are unfamiliar, and I hope it's most of you, heads and decks are the title and subtitle in a piece of content, and taken together, they should pretty well summarize what the piece is about. I think the New York Times took some liberties in that formula with the title here, but Ian, do you want to briefly describe to listeners what this piece talks about?
This piece talks about subdivisions that are including very small houses in them. I forget the range given in that particular article, but the article actually referenced, I think, maybe the second or third largest home builder in North America, and how they were building some of these smaller homes into their developments. And I know the level of economic data that size of a developer is plowing into their pro forma for a development. So if they can make money on it, it's got to be worth doing at that scale.
Can you first start by explaining to the rest of us what pro forma means in this context, please?
I think in this context, it would be the financial summary of how you plan on returning the investment of
how
your
you're going to make money on
shareholders
400 square foot houses is
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think about this, Brian?
I mean, it seems that some of these neighborhoods are working for the developers and the homeowners, and I think that's great. I've always been, I'm a fan of right-sized houses. I've always been a little bit skeptical of really micro houses, definitely tiny houses, but even micro houses as a solution, because I just don't. I don't know. I just think having lived in small places and having seen working at the magazine, seen many 500, 600, even 800 square foot places. I often wonder how many people and families are really going to be comfortable and happy in these places for long. It just doesn't. They just don't jibe with how we tend to live. But at the same time, the article says this is we're talking about 1% of the industry, and if it works for 1% of the developers and 1% of the homeowners, I think that's awesome.
I'm going to read a couple paragraphs from this piece. Like I said, this comes from the New York Times, and I'll link to that feature on the podcast page for those of you who want to dig deeper. For Mr. Lanter's life and the U.S. housing market, a house under $300,000 is something increasingly hard to find. That price allowed Mr. Lanter, a 63-year-old retired nurse, to buy a single-family home in a subdivision in Redmond, Oregon, about 30 minutes outside Bend, where he is from, and which is, along with its surrounding area, one of Oregon's most expensive housing markets. I hear it's lovely there, which is probably has a lot to do with the desirability of real estate. Mr. Lanter's house could easily fit on a flatbed truck and is dwarfed by the two-story suburban homes that prevail on the blocks around him. But in fact, there are even smaller homes in his subdivision. Cinder Butte, which was developed by a local builder called Hayden Homes. Some of his neighbors live in houses that total just under 400 square feet, a 20 by 20 foot house attached to a 20 by 20 foot garage. I think that's really interesting. So they're selling a garage that is the same size as the house. And if I had to live in 400 square feet, I would tell you, if I had an equal size garage, it would be a lot easier. Yeah. The article goes on to say homes under 500 square feet are not taking over anytime soon. They're less than 1% of the new homes built in America, according to Zonda, a housing data and consulting firm. Also, I read in this article, I found it very interesting. The iconic Cape Cods in Levittown, New York, often considered the model post World War II suburb, were typically around 700 square feet, roomy for a one-bedroom apartment, but small for a freestanding house with 2 bedrooms. So, is that still too small in your estimation, Brian? 700 square feet?
Well, I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to put a stake in the ground on too small. Because it really depends on the family, the person, how they're going to live in their house, and if you can be comfortable in 750 square feet or less, I'm all for it. Like I said, I think that I guess the difference is that I wish that more of the industry is thinking about right sizing houses. And by right sizing, I mean designing smarter houses so they, instead of just throwing square footage at the houses, right? I think that was like Sarah Suzanka's whole thing with the not so big house, right? She often laments that, she became this, figurehead for small houses, when really what she was saying was not you have to live in a small house, was that, we should be designing houses that are smarter, so that smarter and not just bigger, designed well and designed for how we live. That's why she often, sort of threw shade at the formal living room, because she just was like, I don't see any Americans using their formal living rooms. Why do we keep, including these in houses? It's things like that that was sort of her. That was her soapbox.
You don't have a formal sunken living room adjacent to your formal dining room, adjacent to your giant 2-story foyer entry, Brian? You don't have one of those? Come on.
I forgot that in my plans.
Andres, what do you?
Yeah, so it's not size, right? For me, it's like, sure, as small as you can be comfortable in.
What do you think, Andres?
No
You
more
were
is
our newest home buyer. Would you have considered a house this little?
If it was only for me and I would say my wife, and I would consider it, because I used to live in apartment buildings that were 400, up to like 700 square feet, and I did find it big enough. The only downside is I didn't have a yard. But, as opposed to this small house, I will have a yard, and that's as much as I need. Once I start to, have kids, and then obviously you're going to outgrow your house. But I would consider, this small house. Plus, it's less maintenance.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about it too. I think, living in multifamily, I think is great for someone else. So, that's I think what our comparison is. But, if you want to make the space your own, or make changes, or listen to music late at night, or work the late shift, whatever it is, you have to fit into your neighbors' lives, and they have to fit into yours, and you have to all get it together. If you have your own walls, even if they're 20 feet away from the neighbor's house, like they appear to be in this subdivision, at least it's your space, and you can live with some greater degree of freedom, I would say. It blows my mind that one of these things costs $300,000. It's crazy.
I'll be interested to see what the market is for them in a few years. If you think about housing as a generator of individual and family long-term wealth, what's the market for that $300,000, 700 square foot house going to be in a couple of years? And I think having one near Bend or near San Francisco or some of these other high value real estate areas, I could see it working there.
One of the things that made folks keep the Levittown houses around, right? Real estate that doesn't work has a tendency to go away pretty quickly. But those homes were all added onto, either shortly after or a decade or two later, and now they're big, 3,000, 2,500 square feet. So I wonder if the same thing can happen to these tightly spaced together houses. I want to say that, at least to me, it looked like the Levittown lots were bigger than this, but I don't know that for sure. Thoughts?
I would be interested to see if these houses are conceived and engineered in a way that would allow them to have a second story or a big giant greedy dormer addition on the back of it added to it to allow it to expand in an upward direction, assuming that it probably can't go into the backyard or into the front yard. Does it have a porch on it that could be enclosed later in the living space, things like that?
So to my eye, they look like 2-story houses already, and I think if you made it any taller, it would look ridiculous because it looks to be about less than 20 feet wide, maybe 15.
Right. Right. So we're already talking about something that's probably got 60% of its square footage on the floor or on the first floor, and then 40% is a small Cape style second story.
It's even smaller than I first absorbed because assuming they have a 3-foot door on them, it looks to be about.
Oh, he's doing math.
Yeah, it looks to be. Well, if you all have thoughts on small houses, big houses, or any kind of houses, I hope you'll write them into the podcast email box and share them with us because we do love hearing from you. Any thoughts before we part company, gents? It's been a pleasure.
One thing I wanted to throw out there to the audience, I was, speaking of doing math, starting to look at what the heating bill for my house was over this last winter. And if there's anybody else out there doing that math and comparing it to prior winters, I'd love to hear how your house performed, at least in the Midwest, where it was a much more mild winter than we're accustomed to.
Did you use noticeably less electricity heating your place?
Yeah, I think it's between the electricity and propane, it's almost 60% of what I had been, what I had budgeted.
Wow. What are you going to do with the windfall? You're not telling me.
Buy garden tractor implements, cowboy hats.
Well, thank you all for listening. It's always great to hear from you. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Brian, Ian, and Andres for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to FHBpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Please keep craft alive. Happy building.